Welcome back. Joining me is Will Murphy, President and General Manager of Northeast Indiana Public Radio, WBOI and WBNI. Will, good to have you.
Thanks, Chuck. Good to be here.
You're relatively new to Northeast Indiana. You began your duties at Public Radio in January. Where were you before you came to Northeast Indiana?
I came to Fort Wayne from Bloomington, Indiana. I had been the general manager at a community station down there for about a little over 2 years, 2.5 years. And before that, I was news director at WFIU, which is the NPR member station in Bloomington.
Down in Bloomington. Here in Fort Wayne at Public Radio, you actually oversee 2 radio stations, WBOI and WBNI. Tell our audience a little bit about the difference between the two.
Well, BOI at 89.1 is a station that is primarily news during business hours and morning hours. And then in the evening, we do a lot of music programming, primarily jazz music. We do a few other things, but primarily jazz.
Yeah.
And then BNI, as you know, as a fan of classical music, is our classical station. No news at all to speak of.
Yes.
Entirely classical program.
Yeah, fantastic classical station, actually,
Thank you.
if I could say so myself. What is the distinction between public radio and commercial radio? What is the definition of a public radio station?
You'd probably get a lot of different definitions depending upon who you talk to about that, but one difference is obvious. We can't do commercials per se. We do underwriting, and some people say there's no difference, but there really is. We can't mention price. We can't mention we can't induce people to buy anything. We can't make claims of value. We can't say anything's biggest, smallest, best, anything. We just have messages saying support comes from X business or Y business. So that's one difference, is we're commercial free. The main difference as well, I think, comes from the sources of support. So we get 40% of our budget from folks who listen and like it enough that they actually write a check once a year to show their support. So the funding comes primarily from folks who listen to it and like it, supplemented by revenue from underwriting, from private and corporate grants, and then some federal funding and state funding as well.
Right, and you do all those great news programs all day long, the NPR news as well as the music at night. What makes public radio important today?
I think public radio is really critically important right now, primarily because of the mission behind it. For example, with WBNI and BOI, with Northeast Indiana Public Radio, the mission is to enrich the community through the content we provide, to enrich the human experience. We're not profit-driven. And so I think the ethics behind and the ethos behind public broadcasting is what distinguishes us. And I think at a time when politically and otherwise people tend to be shouting at each other, there's a discourse that's very civil on public radio. People don't raise their voice. They're interested in exchanging ideas with people they disagree with. And I think that's hard to come by these days. So I think in a democracy, when a conversation is very important, public radio is an important place to find that. The other part I think that's very important is we simply provide programming that you can't get elsewhere, whether it's classical music or this extended coverage of something like Morning Edition or All Things Considered. That's just very difficult to come by.
Right, exactly, and it's part of our heritage. I like what you say about democracy. You know, the Greeks who invented democracy, in which a lot of our democracy is based off of, particularly Aristotle said, you know, democracy depends upon having an informed citizenry and a civil group of people that can discuss things in a calm way without getting personal. And you're right, there is so many different points of view on NPR, but what do you say to some people who might feel that, and this has been in the news a little bit, that NPR or public radio has a liberal bias?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Coming from a news background, my response is always, show me the evidence. I want to see the evidence of that. If you can point to a case, and people can probably point to occasional cases where there's an example of reporting that isn't as careful as it should be, but that's true of any news source, I suppose. But for me, I don't see the evidence of liberal bias. The whole premise of public radio, of NPR News, is to get as many voices in the conversation as possible, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, Independent, everybody's welcome at the table. So I'd like to see the specific examples. Some people might point to the Juan Williams debacle from about a year ago. I think that was badly handled. That was horribly done. That was a stupid decision, in my opinion, to let Juan Williams go, or at least to handle it the way they did.
Yeah.
But that was a business decision. I think that was not something that was generally supported in the news department and the news side of things. So I don't see that evidence of liberal bias, and I really do welcome if folks see it. I want them to point it out to me so that we can address it.
That's great. That's good to know, because I think there's a lot of us that are, there are a lot of problems out there, and a lot of issues that are very, very complex, and we're really just looking for calm, reasoned discussion from both sides of the political spectrum, and that's hard to find. So, I think anybody that can deliver that, whether it's NPR or PBS, I think is doing a great service. You have both national programming on the station as well as local programming. Tell us about some of your your national programming and some of your local programming that you feature.
Probably the best known national programming that we feature, of course, are the anchor news programs, Morning Edition and All Things Considered. We run Morning Edition from 5 to 9 in the morning. So we have 4 hours of thorough news coverage that does everything from the crisis in Europe over debt to the latest music you might hear on country radio stations. It's a fairly thorough program. And then All Things Considered, and the name kind of covers what that's about. It's whatever is significant in the day, and that runs from 4 to 7 in the evening. Those are the flag post programs Monday through Friday. And then we've got, of course, Diane Rehm, which is another program where she brings people in from all over the cultural and political spectrum, has a very civil dialogue about issues.
Is she on every day, or
Monday through Friday?
Monday through Friday, and has discussions on all things political.
Yep. Terry Gross, the same sort of thing, a very civil conversation with somebody who's interesting for whatever reason, through arts, through TV, books, whatever it might happen to be, a wide-ranging roster of guests. Then we have Talk of the Nation, which is a call-in program. People come in and sort of talk about the pressing issue of that particular day. And on Friday, that program turns into Science Friday to talk about specifically science-based issues for an hour or two.
I see.
Then there are weekend programs that people might know a bit more, like Car Talk with Tommy and Ray Magliozzi. Even folks who never listen to public radio tend to listen to Car Talk because they're very funny.
They sure are.
And they reflect what public radio tries to do at its best, which is inform you and educate you, but that at the same time you don't notice it because you're laughing too hard. You're having a good time. So those are some of the flagship programs. Prairie Home Companion would be another one.
I love Prairie Home Companion. That's on Saturday evenings, isn't
Saturday and Sunday as well.
Oh, that's one. And you had Carl Kasell.
We did have Carl Kasell,
who was just here in Fort Wayne at IPFW.
Yep.
Well, the day before we're taping the show, featured on public radio as well.
Absolutely. He was the very first news anchor on Morning Edition in 1979, the very first voice heard on the very first newscast from the very first episode of Morning Edition. He did that for 30 years. And that was after he'd already had a very full career working with Charles Kurald, Andy Griffith. He hired Katie Couric as a summer intern.
Oh my gosh.
He had a very thorough history in broadcasting. So we thought it'd be nice to bring some of the national voices to Fort Wayne to introduce local folks to the actual people that they hear on the radio.
You also do a lot of local programming. My favorite and a friend of the show is Julia Meek.
She's phenomenal.
Who does Meet the Music, features regional and local musicians. And what are some of the other regional shows that you do?
Well, let me just pause and echo your praise for Julia Meek. She's an institution. She's phenomenal. And she really came up with that idea a little over a year ago. We just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of that show, and it gets at the whole premise of what we want to do more of at BOI and BNI, which is feature local talent, feature regional people. And so she brings in folks every week to do that kind of thing. We also have started a lot of local collaborations with, for example, Charles Shepard at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art has started a new segment called American Stories, and each week he talks about one item in the museum's collection and the story behind it. We've started a feature with Martin Fisher at Science Central, where he talks about some kind of scientific experiment and runs you through how that works. We have Heritage Trail with Tom Castaldi, which is one of the first things I heard when I came into Fort Wayne one of the first things I heard was a story from Tom about the first professional baseball game, which was played in Fort Wayne, Indiana in 1871. And I thought, when I heard that, I thought that's exactly what I want to hear more of on this station is local content, but content that's relevant to a national audience.
Yes, and I think you guys are doing a great job of that. And by the way, we only have a few more seconds left, but you know, you don't have to listen to the radio anymore on a radio, right? You guys have it streaming.
That is so 19th century.
I know. Well, anyway, you have a wonderful job. Welcome to Fort Wayne.
Thank
Will,
you.
it's good speaking with you.
I
and
appreciate it.
Here's to civility on the air.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Okay. For more information about Northeast Indiana Public Radio, visit nipr.fm or tune in to 89.1 FM or 94.1 FM to listen to their program. Arts Weekly airs every week, Tuesday through Thursday on College Access Television and most Sundays on WFWA PBS 39. You can also see us on YouTube and Facebook and follow us on Twitter. I'm Chuck O'Connor. Thanks for tuning in to Arts Weekly. Join me next week with guests Chris Rakowski from the IPFW Department of Music and Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater Sound, as well as Daniel Roining and Tom Remenschneider from the Bach Collegium.